Tonight, we wade into the gritty, the uncertain, and the not-so-glorious side of the Middle Ages. You might picture feasts and banners. Most days were about getting through the night. The truth is, you probably wouldn't last a day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Phone face down, volume at a whisper. Let's go in. The story begins in a place of profound quiet. On the great arid sea of grass that is the Central Asian steppe, imagine a silence so complete it has a weight. For centuries, this was the heartland of a secret, a microscopic pact between a bacterium, a flea, and a rodent. Yersinia, Pestis, the plague bacterium, lived quietly in the blood of burrowing marmots. It was part of a brutal, natural cycle. A flea would bite an infected animal, and the bacteria would multiply inside the flea's gut, forming a thick gelatinous blockage. The flea, now starving and desperate, would leap to a new host. But it couldn't swallow, so with each frantic bite, it would regurgitate a septic slurry of bacteria directly into the bloodstream of its new victim. The marmot would sicken, swell with painful buboes, and die. Its fleas would abandon the cooling corpse, seeking another warm body. This was the invisible engine of the steppe, a low hum of mortality beneath the earth. For a long time, it meant nothing to humanity. But in the early 1300s, the equilibrium shattered. The climate shifted, cooling into the Little Ice Age. On the steppe, droughts scorched the earth, forcing rodents together. Then floods drove them out. The plague cycle was violently disrupted. Starving, infected fleas began jumping onto anything: warm horses, camels, the hunters who came for pelts. At the same time, another force was reshaping the world: the Pax Mongolica. Genghis Khan's descendants had built the largest land empire in history, stitching Asia together with secure trade routes. The Silk Road was now a superhighway, stowed away in the grain sacks of caravans, hidden in the fur of agile black rats. The fleas began to travel. The steppe's secret was out, moving west at the speed of commerce toward a continent with no memory of it and no defense. It arrived at Europe's doorstep in 1346. At the Genoese trading port of Kaffa on the Black Sea, a Mongol army laid siege to the city. But then the plague appeared in the Mongol camp. It tore through the tents. Soldiers died by the hundreds. In a rage of spite, the Khan, Johnny Beg, is said to have ordered his catapults loaded with a new ammunition. The swollen, blackened corpses of his own dead men hurled over the walls into the city. It was an act of terror. The real invasion, however, was far smaller. It came on the rats that scurried through the siege lines and the fleas on their backs. The Genoese defenders, stricken with a horror they couldn't comprehend, abandoned Kaffa. They scrambled onto their galleys, desperate to sail home to Italy. They thought they were escaping. They were, in fact, piloting the delivery vehicles of the apocalypse. Imagine those ships. Overcrowded, stinking holds. The first sailor falls ill, a sudden fever, a crushing headache, then the swellings. In the groin, the armpit bulging to the size of an apple. Dark purple blotches bloom on his skin. He's dead in days. Then another sickens, and another. The ships become floating coffins. By October 1347, these ghost ships limped into the harbor of Messina, Sicily. The Sicilians saw the silent decks, the corpses piled like cordwood. In horror, they drove the ships away. But it was too late. The true passengers had already disembarked. Rats scurried down the mooring ropes. Fleas hopped into the straw and thatch of the city. The beachhead was secured. This was the killer, a biological machine of chilling efficiency. Yersinia pestis had accomplices. The flea turned into a living, starving syringe. The black rat, a nimble climber that lived in the walls and roofs of human homes. Once the bacteria jumped to people, it attacked in three forms. The most common was bubonic plague. The bacteria traveled to the lymph nodes, which swelled into agonizing buboes. Fever, chills, and death for about 60% of its victims. Then, septicemic plague, a direct assault on the bloodstream causing internal bleeding and gangrene, turning the skin black, almost always fatal within a day. And finally, the most terrifying, pneumonic plague. Once the infection reached the lungs, it could travel through the air. A single cough in a crowded room could doom everyone in it. This form killed nearly 100% of its victims, often in less than 2 days. This was the engine that now roared to life in Europe. From Sicily, the tide spread with methodical, terrifying speed. Ships carried it to Genoa and Venice. By 1348, it was in Marseille, then surging up the Rhine River to Avignon, the city of the Pope. Pope Clement VI watched half his court die. He consecrated the entire river just to have a place to throw the bodies. That same year, it was in Paris, killing 800 a day. It crossed the Pyrenees into Spain, and from the wine port of Bordeaux, it hitched a ride to England. In June 1348, a sailor stepped ashore. The plague was now on English soil. It burned through the southwest, then found Bristol. From there, it raced along rivers and tracks. By autumn, it was in London. A damp winter allowed the pneumonic form to flourish in the city's cramped tenements. When spring 1349 arrived, London exploded. The city dug mass graves at East Smithfield. Bodies laid in orderly rows 5 deep. The plague moved north to York, crossed into Wales and Ireland. Welsh poet wrote of a seed of blackness before he, too, succumbed. That same year, it crossed the North Sea to Norway. It swept through the Holy Roman Empire, Cologne, Vienna, Hamburg. By 1350, it reached the Baltic. By 1352, it was in Russia. In just under 5 years, it had swept from the Crimea to the North Cape, leaving a continent shattered in its wake. To understand why it was so catastrophic, you have to see the medieval city, not the grand cathedrals, but the warren of life within the walls. Streets were narrow, filthy trenches where waste was simply tossed from windows. The air was stagnant. The black rat thrived here, nesting in the thatched roofs just above the sleeping families. People lived crowded together, often whole families in one room, with a straw-covered flora, perfect nest for fleas. This was the tinder, and the plague was the spark. The doctors were helpless. Their entire science was based on the balance of 4 bodily humors and the theory of miasma bad air. They wore beaked masks, stuffed with herbs to filter it. They prescribed bloodletting, which only weakened the sick. They applied poultices of dung and herbs to the buboes. They prescribed potions of crushed emeralds. Nothing worked. Guy de Chauliac, the Pope's own physician, confessed, the plague was so contagious that one man could infect the whole world. Doctors dared not visit the sick. When they did, they could do nothing. With medicine useless and death everywhere, people turned to God. This was seen as flagellum Deathah, scourge of God, a punishment for humanity's sins. But the church seemed powerless. Priests died in droves. Into this spiritual vacuum rushed the flagellants. Processions of men who marched from town to town, whipping themselves with metal-tipped scourges until their backs were a bloody pulp, trying to atone for the world's sins and appease God's wrath. They were first seen as saints, then as dangerous heretics, and were ultimately suppressed. The crisis of faith was deep and lasting. If God was punishing sin, why did the devout nun and the wicked merchant die alike? A terrified society, needing a target it could see, found one. The rumor spread. Jews were poisoning the wells. It made no sense. Jewish communities were being decimated too, but logic dies in panic. The accusations, often extracted under torture, led to unspeakable violence. In 1349 in Strasbourg, nearly 2,000 Jews were burned alive in their own cemetery after being given a choice, convert or die. In Mainz, the community fought back but was massacred. These pogroms, sanctioned by local authorities greedy to cancel debts and seize property, were a dark testament to how fear twists into hatred. The world came apart. The Florentine writer Giovanni Boccaccio described the collapse. The brother abandoned brother, the uncle his nephew, the sister her brother, and very often the wife her husband. Fathers and mothers were found to abandon their own children. Some descended into hedonism, looting empty mansions and holding drunken feasts in the face of death. Others locked themselves away. Commerce stopped. Fallow. The only growth industry was burial. The Beck either corpse carriers roamed at night with their carts, calling, "Bring out your dead." Bodies were tipped into vast plague pits layered like lasagna. When the dying finally slowed, the survivors emerged into a world transformed. In many places, half the people were gone. This emptiness created a seismic shift. For the first time in centuries, labor was scarce and land was plentiful. A peasant who had been tied to his lord's land could now simply walk away and demand higher wages elsewhere. The old feudal system, built on abundant labor, began to crumble. Lords tried to freeze wages with laws like the English Statute of Laborers. It failed. The economic reality was too powerful. This new bargaining power would eventually fuel uprisings like the peasants' revolt of 1381. The social order had been permanently cracked, and the plague never truly left. The first wave was just the beginning. It returned every decade or so for centuries. The Great Plague of London in 1665, the Plague of Marseille in 1720, each outbreak was a fresh trauma. But humanity slowly, painfully learned to fight back. From this nightmare, the very concept of public health was born. The city of Ragusa invented quarantine, forcing arriving ships to wait 40 days, quarantino. Venice established the first isolation hospitals called lazarettos. City health boards gained power to clean streets, restrict movement, and burn the possessions of the sick. The iconic plague doctor, with his beaked mask and leather cloak, became a symbol of this grim, organized resistance. The legacy of the plague is written in our very bones. It was the greatest selective pressure in recent human history. Genetic mutations that may have helped some people survive, like the CCR5 Delta 3-2 variant, became more common in European populations. Centuries later, that same mutation would provide resistance to HIV. The trauma-shaped art, giving us the Danse Macabre, the dance of death where skeletons lead popes and emperors, peasants and children to the grave, a reminder that death is the ultimate equalizer. The Black Death did not just kill millions, it broke the medieval world. It weakened the church, destabilized feudalism, redistributed wealth, and accelerated the shift toward a society based on wages and contracts. It forced a new, more empirical way of thinking about medicine and the state's role in protecting its people. It cleared the ground, painfully, for the Renaissance and the modern age to rise. The survivors of that great silence inherited an empty continent. From the ashes and the silence, they had to build a new world. Our world. And the echo of that silence has never fully faded.